Hello everyone, welcome. Today we're going to dive into ventilation. This is really the critical first step of respiration, the whole business of moving gas from the air around us all the way down into the alveoli, where the real magic happens.
Now, just before we jump in, a quick note. This explainer is an AI-generated summary based on Dr. John West's amazing lecture on ventilation. For those of you who don't know, his textbook is basically the Bible for respiratory physiology. It's been foundational for generations of us in pulmonary and critical care. Dr. West also recorded a full lecture series, which I seriously recommend you watch. The link's right there in the description below. And we have summaries of his other lectures on this channel, so feel free to check those out as well.
Okay, let's get started with Section 1, the airways. To really get a handle on ventilation, you first have to appreciate the just beautiful architecture of the respiratory tree, because its structure dictates its function. Have you ever seen a cast of the pulmonary airways? It's this gorgeous branching network, but it is just desperately complicated. So the first obvious question is, how on earth do we make sense of what's going on inside such a complex maze? Well, thankfully, we have the Weibull model. Now look, it's a huge oversimplification for sure, but it is so incredibly useful. It basically splits the airways into two distinct areas. First, you've got the conducting zone. Think of this as the plumbing. It runs from the trachea down to the terminal bronchioles, and critically, this is your anatomic dead space. It's about 150 milliliters of tubing where absolutely no gas exchange happens. Then, everything after that is the respiratory zone, from the respiratory bronchioles all the way down to the alveoli. This is where the action is. It's where all gas exchange takes place, and believe it or not, it makes up the vast majority of the lung's volume.
Now here is where it gets really cool. Take a look at what happens to the total cross-sectional area as you go deeper into the lung. For the first bunch of generations, the bronchi, it doesn't change all that much. But as soon as you hit that respiratory zone, bam! The total area just explodes. It's enormous. Dr. West uses the analogy of the flare of a trumpet, and honestly, that's just a perfect way to picture it.
So what? Why does this matter? Well, it has this profound physical consequence. You have the same amount of air flowing through, but now it's moving through this massively expanded area. The result? The forward velocity of the gas just plummets. It slows down to an absolute crawl deep inside the lung.
This dramatic drop in speed forces a complete change in how gas gets around. In the upper airways, the conducting zone, where the velocity is high, gas moves by convection. It's just simple bulk flow, like pouring water from a jug. But deep down in the respiratory zone, where that forward flow is almost zero, a different process takes over. It's all about diffusion, the random chaotic movement of gas molecules. That's what carries oxygen across that final critical distance to the alveolar wall.
And this simple physical fact explains a huge piece of pathology. Think about inhaled particles, like tobacco smoke or coal dust. They're carried down by convection, no problem. But these particles are way too big and heavy to move by diffusion. So what happens when that forward velocity just dies out? Well, they literally fall out of the air and get stuck, right at the junction between the conducting and respiratory zones. This is exactly why the earliest damage in diseases like chronic bronchitis happens in those little airways. And you can see it plain as day in a coal miner's lung. All the dust is deposited right around the respiratory bronchioles, while the alveoli deeper in are often spared. It's a perfect illustration of this principle.
Okay, so now that we have a feel for the structure of the airways, let's move on and actually put some numbers on it. Let's talk about lung volumes and capacities. So let's just look at some typical volumes here. Your average tidal volume, a normal breath, is about half a liter, 500 milliliters. We just learned that about 150 milliliters of that is wasted in the anatomic dead space. But check out the alveolar gas volume. It's a whopping 3,000 milliliters, or 3 liters. That's a huge reservoir of gas sitting there ready for exchange.
But here's the number that just blows my mind every time I see it. At any given moment, the total amount of blood in all the pulmonary capillaries is only about 70 milliliters. Just think about that for a second. 3,000 milliliters of gas is interacting with only 70 milliliters of blood. It's just this tiny film of blood spread out over an area the size of a tennis court. It really underscores how incredibly efficient this whole system is.
So how do we actually measure these volumes in the clinic? Well, the old workhorse is the spirometer. You've all seen this. You have the patient start with just normal, quiet breathing. That's their tidal volume. Then you tell them, okay, take the biggest breath you possibly can. They fill up to their total lung capacity, or TLC. And right from the top you yell, now blast it all out, hard and fast, keep going, keep going, keep going. They blow out as much air as they can, all the way down to their residual volume, or RV. And that total amount of air they just blew out, that's the vital capacity.
But there's a catch, isn't there? Spirometry is fantastic for measuring the air that moves, the vital capacity. But it's completely blind to the gas that's left behind in the lungs, the gas that can't be exhaled, the residual volume. And if you can't measure RV, you can't calculate the functional residual capacity or the total lung capacity either. So, how do you measure what seems to be unmeasurable?
Well, that brings us right to Section 3. We're going to look at the two classic techniques that let us do just that: helium dilution and the body plethysmograph.
Okay, so first up is helium dilution. The principle here is actually pretty simple. It's just conservation of mass. We use helium because it's an inert gas. It's not taken up by the blood at all. So you have the patient breathe from a spirometer that has a known starting volume, V1, and a known helium concentration, C1. As the patient breathes back and forth, the helium mixes and spreads out into their lungs until the concentration is the same everywhere. Since no helium was lost, the initial amount, C1 times V1, has to equal the final amount, which is the final concentration, C2, times the new total volume. And that new volume is just the spirometer plus the patient's lungs, V1 plus FRC. A little bit of simple algebra, and boom, you've solved for FRC.
The other method is the body plethysmograph, which everyone just calls the body box. This technique is based on a different principle, Boyle's law. Remember that from physics? P1V1 equals P2V2. The patient sits inside this airtight box, like an old telephone booth, and they're told to make an inspiratory effort, to pant, against the closed shutter. As they try to breathe in, their chest expands. This expansion compresses the air in the box, which makes the pressure in the box go up. At the same time, the gas inside their lungs gets decompressed, so the pressure at their mouth goes down. By measuring those pressure changes and applying Boyle's law, we can very accurately calculate their FRC.
Okay, here's the money slide. Why in the world do we have two different methods? Because they measure slightly different things, and that difference is hugely important clinically. See, helium dilution can only measure the volume of lung that's actually connected to the mouth, the gas that the helium can mix with. The body box, on the other hand, measures the total volume of gas inside the thorax, whether it's connected or not. So picture a patient with severe COPD who has big obstructed bulling. The helium can't get into those trapped-off areas, so the helium dilution test is going to underestimate their true lung volume. But the body box, it measures everything. So the difference between the body box FRC and the helium dilution FRC gives you a direct measurement of how much gas is trapped in the patient's lungs. That is a critical piece of information.
All right, that brings us to our final, and I would argue our most clinically important section. We're going to talk about alveolar ventilation, because this is the number that really tells you if gas exchange is happening effectively.
So what exactly is alveolar ventilation? Simple. It's the amount of fresh air that actually gets down to the respiratory zone every minute. It's not the same as total ventilation, right? It's your total minute ventilation minus all the air that was just wasted shuffling back and forth in the dead space. This is the only part of breathing that actually contributes to gas exchange. This is the only ventilation that matters.
So how can we possibly measure this? It seems impossible, but there's a remarkably elegant way to do it, and it all comes down to carbon dioxide. The logic is flawless. Basically, all of the CO2 you breathe out has to come from the alveolar gas. Why? Because the dead space is filled with fresh air you just breathed in, which has almost no CO2. This beautiful little fact allows us to derive what is probably one of the most powerful and important equations in all of respiratory medicine, the alveolar ventilation equation. It tells us that alveolar ventilation is directly proportional to your body's CO2 production divided by your arterial PCO2. The clinical power of this equation is just immense. It lays out a direct, inverse relationship between alveolar ventilation and PaCO2. It's like a seesaw. If you have your patient's alveolar ventilation, maybe you gave them too much sedation, their PaCO2 is going to double, period. If you double their alveolar ventilation with the mechanical ventilator, their PaCO2 will be cut right in half. This equation is the physiological definition of hypoventilation and hyperventilation. It has nothing to do with how fast someone is breathing, it's all about the PaCO2. This is, without a doubt, a cornerstone equation for understanding and managing respiratory failure. So let's wrap this up. We started with the Weibull model, which helped us understand the lung structure and why inhaled particles get stuck where they do. We then put numbers to the lung volumes and saw that incredible mismatch between the huge volume of gas and the tiny volume of blood. And we've just ended with the alveolar ventilation equation, which is our key to understanding blood gases. Now, one last thought to leave you with. Alveolar ventilation in a healthy person is about 4 to 5 liters a minute. And you know what else is about 4 to 5 liters a minute? Pulmonary blood flow, your cardiac output. That means the ratio of ventilation to perfusion is normally very close to 1.
And that ventilation-perfusion ratio, well, that's a concept we're going to come back to over and over again.
Thank you so much for your time today. I really hope you found this useful. Our field is just filled with these long-standing assumptions, and real progress only happens when we start to question them. So treat every source with a bit of healthy skepticism, and I really encourage you to take the time to review Dr. West's book on respiratory physiology for yourself.